In preparing for this lesson, I've learned something. Preachers don't make enough money. If you don't like the sermon this morning, I will tell you this. In correlation to the pay scale, it's not that bad. When people come up to talk, a lot of times they say, this lesson is meant for me as much as it is you. I'm going to go a little step further than that. I think the lesson is probably meant more for me than it is you. I know that none of us will actually know what we would do in a situation like this, like I'm going to ask you, but I want you to think about it anyway. If you had been told that you must get your house in order because you're going to die soon, and that you were made aware you had been granted 15 more years to live, what would you do? Would you change any habits that you have? Would you pray more? Would you study more diligently? Better help the sick and needy? Teach some lost soul about Jesus and His church? Contribute more to the Lord's church? Give God the glory, and I want you to keep in mind these 3 or 4 words in the whole lesson this morning about giving God the glory. It's very important. Would you give God the glory for what He's blessed us with, or really strive to prepare for the meeting of the Lord? A situation like this actually happened in the Bible. Extension of life was granted to a good king of Judah named Hezekiah about 700 BC. This situation is probably not going to happen to you or to me, but we're going to play like that it might. I want you to turn your Bibles to the 38th chapter of Isaiah. The 38th chapter of Isaiah. Now, what we're going to read here, it's almost the same wording in 2 Kings, the 18th and 20th chapters, 2 Chronicles 32. It's almost the same reading, but I chose Isaiah because if Hezekiah gets to heaven, I feel sure Isaiah was a big part of it because he sure helped him out. Chapter 38 of Isaiah, starting with verse 1. In those days was Hezekiah sick unto death, and Isaiah the prophet, the son of Amos, came unto him and said unto him, Thus saith the Lord, Set thine house in order, for thou shalt die and not live. If you want to know where that expression, get your house in order, came from, you just saw it. Then Hezekiah turned his face toward the wall and prayed. He prayed unto the Lord and said, Remember now, O Lord, I beseech thee, how I have walked before thee in truth and with a perfect heart, and have done that which is good in thy sight. And Hezekiah wept sore. Then came the word of the Lord to Isaiah, saying, Go and say to Hezekiah, Thus saith the Lord, the God of David thy father, I have heard thy prayer, I have seen thy tears. Behold, I will add unto thy day 15 years. The lesson today that I'm going to talk to you about is twofold. One, to think about one's time left to live, and also to examine some facts about the man that was granted some extra time to live. I want to review some facts about Hezekiah and see how he lived for God before the bonus years were given to him and after the bonus years were given to him. We read about him in the Old Testament, and there's over 100 references to Hezekiah in the Old Testament. In 2 Kings, 1st and 2nd Chronicles, and from the prophets Jeremiah, Hosea, and Micah. In 2 Kings 18 and verse 5, we read that Hezekiah was one of the best kings Judah ever had, and is known for possessing the greatest faith of Judah's kings. For you Old Testament scholars, you know that the northern kingdom had already been taken over. There were no good kings in the northern kingdom. In the southern kingdom, as we said here, Hezekiah was a good king, and I think we read that Josiah was a good king, and maybe Asa was above average. We tend to have admiration for Hezekiah when we consider his family background. His father was Ahaz, a wicked, apostate father and king, so much so, it's a wonder that Hezekiah could come out of that and be what we said, a good king and a good person. Because of his upbringing and his moral development. I want to enter a thought here about psychology. You've seen this happen so many times before, and it'll happen again in the near future. Some guy goes into a grocery store and kills 5 or 6 people. Then he kills himself, or the policeman kills him, or what have you. And the very next week, we get a report, and here's the report we get. We went back and we're going to study his childhood. We're going to see what happened to him when he was growing up. And that's important. In my lifetime, I have seen some people that have survived their first 10, 15, 20 years, and I don't see how they did it. That's a very important aspect, are your parents. And probably in this audience, we've had good parents, so it may not apply to you. But I've seen some people, I don't see how they made it. So we study what happened in their life, in their childhood and so forth, and we come up with the conclusion. This is the reason that they're the way they are. I want to tell you something, especially for your young people and you older people. There will be a time, it may be when you obey the Lord, it may be when you're 40 years old, it may be when you're 50 years old. There's going to be a time when it's just you and the Lord. Your parents have nothing to do with it. Your grandparents have nothing to do with it. It's just you and the Lord. And you're going to have to make those decisions or that decision what you're going to have to do. You can't go back and say, I'm this way because of my mother and my daddy, my parents, my grandparents. You just can't do it. You're alone now with the Lord, and you're going to make your own decisions on what you're going to do about the rest of your life. I asked Jonah to read in Thessalonians because of one verse. When we were studying the book of Thessalonians, there was a verse that stood out to me more than anything in reference to what I'm talking about. We didn't talk about it a lot, but in that verse 4 that Jonah read, going back a little bit in Paul's writing to the Thessalonians, he was probably in jail or going to be in jail and getting beaten and so forth. And he had a special love for the Thessalonian brethren. He was very impressed with their love for each other and what they had done for each other. And when he wrote that letter back to them, he wanted them to strive to do better. Don't stay like you are. I want you to do better. I want you to keep going, because you've got all these Gentiles around you that's going to hurt you. You've got all these Jews that kill the Lord. They're around you. It's going to be hard. And I want you to keep growing in the Lord. And that verse 4 stood out to me so much, and I don't know that we know what it means, but it said, I want you to go to that verse. Just open your Bible and look at that. It says something like this. It said, you possess your vessel. And what that means is you possess your own vessel. And he told them that the main thing you need to do is be sanctified. Be sanctified. Keep going. But you're going to be responsible for your own vessel, your own body. Nobody is going to be there for you. We tend to have admiration for Hezekiah because of these things I just said. When Hezekiah went to the throne at age 25, he began a period of religious revival in which he was encouraged by the eloquent, wise, noble prophet Isaiah. I don't know what he would have done if he hadn't have had Isaiah. Here are a few things to remember about Hezekiah that aided him to be a good king and will perhaps help us if we practice these things. Number one, he prayed about difficulties and dangers he faced. His great faith and confidence in God was revealed when, after he received a letter from Sennacherib, the king of Assyria. And again, you Old Testament scholars know that Assyria had just captured the northern kingdom. And Sennacherib told Hezekiah and all his followers that it won't be but just a little while till you'll be in the same boat they are. We're going to overtake you just like we did the northern kingdom. He sent a letter to Hezekiah denoting those things. What did Hezekiah and Isaiah do? They immediately went into prayer. And what happened at this present time? Over 185,000 Assyrians were killed in that camp one day because of the Lord. And later, Sennacherib, in his shame and embarrassment, ended up going back home and was killed by his two sons in shame and embarrassment. Just remember, no matter what the world situation is today, the Lord is in control. The Lord is still in control. When Hezekiah was made aware he had a fatal illness, he turned his face to the wall and prayed. Isaiah came to him and told him God said he would not die and would have an additional 15 years. Hezekiah had fervently asked God to let him live, and God promised to continue his life for these additional years. We wonder why Hezekiah desired the removal of his illness and the continuation of his life. Although I guess this is just a natural desire. What did he have in mind? Was he anxious to live in order to promote, as I said a while ago, the glory of God? Or did he have a personal motive? Something to think about in reference to what I asked you at the beginning of this lesson. Was he afraid of death? Did he love life itself? Whatever. It's apparent He didn't view death as the Apostle Paul viewed death, since Paul had a desire to depart to be with the Lord. Seeing death was far better than life on the earth for him. That reminded me of a situation that happened here. I have talked to people before, one-on-one, about death, about how apparent it was to the other person, and we talked about it. But I had never been in an opportunity or a place, or had an opportunity or been a place where someone talked to a whole group like Alan Harper did one time. It kind of got to me a little bit because I know that he was saying that I'm ready to go. And his concern was not for him, but was for us, the glory of God to be in us. And as I was listening to him, and I don't want you to get on to me for this, but as I was listening to him, I was wondering, am I ready to go? Are you ready to go? Now, I know we better be ready to go, but I wondered, am I ready to go? At the time of his sickness, Hezekiah had no son, no heir to the throne. And this fact may have led him to want to have additional years. It could have. 3 years after his recovery, Manasseh, Hezekiah's son, was born. Now that was a couple of good ones to be between Ahaz and Manasseh. Manasseh was probably one of the worst kings that Judah ever had. He became a curse on the earth and an abomination in the Lord's sight. Manasseh even offered his son to an idol. And after Hezekiah had wiped the country clean, the kingdom clean of idols and wickedness, here comes Manasseh and puts them all back up. It's possible that Judah could have been better if Hezekiah had died and not lived because of the heir that he had. Sometimes God graciously grants our request, but brings leanness to our souls, as said in Psalms 106 and verse 5. That means that we better be careful what we ask for. Perhaps Hezekiah's request for life began with his unwillingness to leave this life when God said he was going to die. That's 2 Kings 20, 1 through 3. Number 2, besides Hezekiah's praying fervently to God, we can add his faith in God supplied a great source of strength to him. His faith produced a strong perception that God was near, a near close association with a higher power that he could trust wholly. One of the main lessons in Hezekiah's life could be summed up by saying to all of us, have faith in God. Now let's look at some of the crises Hezekiah faced, because we're all going to meet with crisis. Maybe we can learn further from our looking at Hezekiah's life. There was the crisis of choice. Hezekiah chose to forsake the idols of his father. Hezekiah chose to forsake those idols that King Ahaz had put before the king and purge the kingdom of Judah of idolatry. That's in 2 Kings 18 and 22. Also, the crisis of invasion by the enemy. You can read about that in 2 Chronicles chapter 32. We talked about Sennacherib and how he was going to overrun the whole kingdom just like he did the other. What did they do? they went to prayer. There was a crisis of sickness. We've already read about that in Isaiah 38. And the crisis of prosperity. And I guess this might be my main point in the lesson today. The crisis of prosperity. Hezekiah's faith and closeness to God and his reliance on prayer and his great attributes as king of Judah, we've all talked about. But we also know the Bible talks about people's shortcomings as well. Hezekiah lost favor with God for a time because of pride. After all the blessings that were bestowed on him, he allowed his heart to be lifted up with pride. His heart became obsessed with his treasures, possessions, and he turned from God to goods. 2 Chronicles 32 tells us, Hezekiah rendered not according to the benefit done to him, meaning he did not give God the glory for answering his prayer concerning giving him life instead of death at that particular time in his life. For his heart was lifted up, therefore there was wrath upon him and upon Judah and upon Jerusalem. This wrath part, listen to me please, this wrath part proves sin hardly ends with the person committing the sin. And as you know, well, one good thing about Hezekiah, and I've got to mention it throughout the lesson, he did humble his heart. But the wrath of God at this particular time, it didn't hurt Hezekiah during his days and during the kingdom of Judah, but what did it do afterwards? Now they've gone to captivity. We're going to have to read here in this area of prosperity, and I do want to read this. I want you to go to 2 Kings, the 18th chapter. Let's read this together. Start at verse 12 in the 18th chapter. I'm sorry, the 20th chapter. The 20th chapter of 2 Kings, verse 12. Listen closely, please. Let's don't go rabbit hunting. I want you to get this. At that time, Berodach Baladan, the son of Baladan, king of Babylon, now think what I said, the king of Babylon, sent letters and a present unto Hezekiah, for he had heard that Hezekiah had been sick. And Hezekiah hearkened unto them and showed them all the house of his precious things, the silver and the gold and the spices and the precious ointment, and all the house of his armor and all that was found in his treasures. There was nothing in his house nor in all his dominion that Hezekiah showed them not. Then came Isaiah. Isaiah came unto him, Hezekiah, and said unto him, What saith these men? And from whence did they come? And Hezekiah said, They came from a far country, even from Babylon. And he said, What have they seen in thine house? And Hezekiah answered, All the things that are in mine house have they seen. There is nothing among my treasures that I have not showed them. And Isaiah said unto Hezekiah, Hear the word of the Lord. Behold, the days come that all that's in thine house, and that which thy fathers have laid up in store unto this day, shall be carried into Babylon. Nothing shall be left, saith the Lord. And of thy sons that shall issue from thee, which thou shalt beget, shall they take away, and they shall be eunuchs in the palace of the king of Babylon. treasures, goods. I know you young people won't like this, a lot of you older people won't. You don't want to hear about us older people have the hard times that we had. I know you don't want to hear that, but you're going to. I remember when I first started coaching, my wife and I, we just got married. We had us a special built mobile home. It was something else. And we moved that mobile home to Warren. And after 2 years, I got a job offer to go to Arkadelphia at Ouachita University. And I took it. And so we're going to move our mobile home to Arkadelphia. She's not going to be teaching the next year. She had been teaching, so we had an income there. She's not going to be teaching now because we had a pregnancy in the family. And so we moved our mobile home to Arkadelphia. And as I was waiting in the mobile home lot for my mobile home to get there, there came this big truck pulling into the mobile home lot, and I thought it was the same truck that left with my mobile home in Warren. And this gentleman came out of the truck that had 2 to 3 teeth in his mouth. And he said, "Mr. Jones, I'm sorry, but we lost your mobile home out on the Ouachita River Bridge. And there was quite a bit of damage done to it, but everything's going to be all right." And so I started my job at Ouachita there, $8,800 a year with my wife not working in my mobile home. I don't guess it was all that bad, but I'm going to tell you something. Times were pretty tough then. They were actually pretty tough. We couldn't go out and eat. We couldn't do things we wanted to do. And they sure weren't going to take the coach out to eat if you hadn't won a 40 or 50 ball game. It was kind of tough. But now I can go to Texas Roadhouse once every 3 months and eat out. Times have really, really changed. Pretty good life now. I doubt that anyone in this audience has been more blessed than I have. It should be more things. And I'm not rich, and you may not be there. But we have a whole lot of things. Now, as we finish the lesson in a few minutes, you're going to learn that the secret to all those things that we have is to make sure that we use them for the glory of God, and we're not going to flaunt them and show them off. I'm going to tell you something right now. I've been thinking about this. Pretty soon I'm going to get me a new Denali GMC. Not going to go Sierra. I'm going to go the big Denali. It's about $10,000 more. But that's what I want. Probably get it. But while I'm thinking about all this, there's something that happened. Got a text from someone that said this: "I've known Wayne Goff all my life, and he's a precious human being. He's never preached for money. He's never asked for money. I'm sure he's had a pretty tough life financially, but he hasn't griped about anything. He retired a couple of years ago, and I knew Wayne well enough to know that he wouldn't stay retired. He was interested in what we were talking about earlier, the glory of God. And I felt sure he'd get back in preaching. And sure enough, a few months ago he did. And he ended up going to the East Coast, 20 or 30 people out there. Probably going to have he hasn't asked for money. And about the same time, he had a son that died. Kind of unusual death. Something that bothered, I'm sure, them greatly. And someone talked to me about, let's send Wayne a little money. May not need it, but let's send him a little money, maybe help the burial expenses. But just let Wayne know we're for him. We want him to do well, and we care about him. I thought about that Denali I wanted. And I'll probably get it. But I thought about prosperity. How do we you may not think you're very prosperous, but how do we handle the prosperity? How did Hezekiah handle it? He got to thinking about all his goods, all his treasures. Want to flaunt them, show everybody what he had. And by the way, if I get that Denali, I want to take some of you around riding and I want to show it off to you too. And I may take you by my office and show you some of the awards I won. We've got to be careful. Here's the answer to it. Everything that we do in this life better be for the glory of God. Now, here's one thing that's a little bit sad. Hezekiah, after his response to Isaiah's words about the consequences of Hezekiah's pride, in 2 Kings 20 and verse 19, this is kind of tragic because Hezekiah met the Lord head on. It was a moment of being alone. Now, we're all going to have that, y'all. We're going to have these moments. We may have some now. We're going to have these moments where we're alone with God. And when we're alone with Him, we better come up with the right answers. God left Hezekiah alone to test him, to know what was in his heart. Prosperity was the test for Hezekiah. He passed the test of adversity and failed the test of prosperity. He shows that it's easy to receive the blessings of God and make them all about us. God blesses us with life, prosperity, family, salvation from sin. And if we're not careful, we'll be thinking about our comfort, our needs, and our glory. Let's strive to use prosperity to direct others to God. Let's remember Hezekiah's problem isn't immorality, murder, lying. It was the accruing of things that made him swell with pride for what he had done and what he had, and failing to give God the glory. Reflect on the rich man in Luke 12. See what you think. Where was his heart? Think about the great leader of the Israelites, Moses. Didn't get to go to the promised land because of what happened in Numbers 20. You know about that. He failed to give God the glory. Now, so much for Hezekiah's attributes and feelings and findings and so forth, failings. Let's get the running question that I asked from the beginning of the lessons. Let's put it through our minds. What would we do if we did have some time added to our lives? What about the present time? What are we doing? Are we accruing more money, things, or using what we have to the glory of God? Please don't get me wrong that there's something wrong with wanting things, but there's a lot of things out there that we should want more. Before the invitation, I want to put something before you. If we had to make a list, just had a piece of paper and we had to make a list of all the things that we had to do to get to heaven, what would that list look like? And I want to bring something to your mind. Kurt mentioned this in class today, and he said nobody preached on it. I'm fixing to preach on it right now. I don't think anybody knows in the world, nobody knows what the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew 7:14 means. I don't think a lot of people that are Christians know what that means. I go to a lot of funerals. I guess it's because I'm old. I go to a funeral with. And in the world, anytime you go to a funeral, not only is that person going to heaven, they're going straight to heaven right then. And they're going to be reunited with their parents, their spouse, or what have you. Can you imagine what would happen if you went to a funeral and there's a casket back there with somebody in it and the preacher said, Bobby Joe is going straight to hell? Can you imagine what would happen? You'd probably drop your false teeth. That's not going to happen. And that's because we don't have a clue what Matthew 7:14 means. We all think everybody in this room is going to heaven. That's what we think. We talked about, how about Noah? When Noah went in that ark, how many people were left? He destroyed the whole world. Nobody would know. How many people got into the promised land? How many people were left in Sodom and Gomorrah? Matthew 7:14 is the most fearful passage in the whole Bible. And we don't take those very simple words and know what it means. There's going to be very few that get into that gate, no matter what you may think. It seemed like Hezekiah might have had the opportunity because of Isaiah. That list I mentioned a minute ago, what if you had to make a list of everything that you could read in the Bible of what you got to do to go to heaven? That list would probably be between 50 and 100, wouldn't it? You got to go to services. You got to give. You got to love your brother. On and on and on and on. You go over to 2 Peter 1, it names a few in a row there. Virtue, knowledge, temperance, patience. In the world that I live in the insurance world, we have contests all the time. You got to do certain things to win the. Has certain areas, there are several areas. Every once in a while, because it's kind of hard, they may let you omit one or two things or have leniency on one or two things. In that 2 Peter passage, it says virtue, knowledge, temperance, patience. I kind of think the Lord will exclude patience if you have a family of 4 and 3 of them are females. He might exclude patience or have some leniency. But there again, I go to James 2. I forgot about James. Go to James 2. All this list that we're going to make here, you exclude one of them, and you're done. Do you see now why Matthew 7:14 is important? I mean, it's scary. It's the scariest passage in the whole Bible. Now, do you see why I might not have been 100% ready when Alan Harper gave that talk? Are you ready? It's a fearful, fearful, fearful thing. In conclusion, in 2 Thessalonians 1:8, it says, those who haven't obeyed the gospel will pay the penalty of eternal destruction away from the presence of the Lord. What does the word say? We must hear the word, believe it, repent, confess, and be baptized. If you need, please come forward as we stand and sing.